Hey, Patty, welcome to our podcast.
Hey, Corinne. Nice to be here.
All right. So, the question we ask all of our guests is, many seekers can recall that point in time when they started to question their reality, that they were taught, their turning points of their conditioned beliefs. So, do you remember when you started doing that or when you became a seeker?
Yeah, actually, with you sending me that question, it made me sit and think a little bit. And it was interesting because I remember it was in 1986 when I was visiting my sister in Sausalito. And we had gone to a Theosophical Society meeting and we had walked outside and we were walking along the bay. And she just looked at me and said, "So, what makes you happy?" And I couldn't name a thing at that point in time. And it was really interesting to me because by every standard, I had my own house, I had my own car, I had a great job, I had great friends, there was no difficulties, no traumas, no, things I'm getting over. Um, and yet I couldn't say that I was happy. And I think that was both a turning point for me not believing what I was told, but it was also a turning point for me to find out the truth because that's what I wanted. That's what I wanted to know was the truth. So I think it was at that point in time that um, it was a 2-year process before I moved to California. I had 3 sisters that had already moved out there. And so I moved out about 2 years later. And then knew that I always wanted to meditate. And I figured in California, that's what they did. So I figured I would learn how to do that. Because I had already had 3 other sisters that were out there. And so I kind of knew a little bit of the lay of the land of what California was like. Yeah. So I went out there thinking that I was going to be working at Stanford, and that job hadn't actually been created yet. And so I figured it was time. Somebody was telling me it was time to take some time off because basically I had just been working, 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 and that's what I did. I took 6 months off and met somebody, and he took me into a lot of different places. We had some fun going to the Oakland A's games and going to the ballet, but he also took me to my first meditation and my first day long, where I went to a place called Green Gulch in Mill Valley. And I walked into a Zendo and I had come home. And he had told me, he said, when you sit, they'll ring a bell and they'll talk about it, they'll tell you this, that you'll face a wall and they'll ring a bell. And then 40 minutes later, they'll ring a bell again. And I said, okay. And he said, if you can't sit for that long, it's okay. You can get up, you can walk around, but just be quiet. And I said, okay. And so I went and sat and looked at a wall, and they rang the bell. And maybe about 2 minutes later, they rang the bell again. And I thought it was a mistake. And because I had no idea where I went or what happened, basically I just became aware and was listening to the trees and the saws, and there was construction going on and the birds, and I became all of that, and just and that's in those seconds, that's what I was. I was the saw, I was the arm, I was the tree, and I thought that's what meditation was. And so it wasn't until years later.
That's a great first experience with meditation for sure. That's a good drink of water for you, for a thirsty soul. But so, how much time was in between that question of what makes you happy and then actually having that meditation experience?
2 years.
Okay.
That was when I moved to California. Yeah, it was basically 2 years.
So, what can you take me back to that experience, what was it like having that first question asked, what makes you happy, realizing there, there needs to be a change, or you need to dive deeper into your own psyche or spirit about what all this is, and then getting to that point where you meditated? What was that process like of kind of?
I can't really say, Sean, because those were not the memorable times. It was after I moved to California, and I'll say had that experience, and then was just so it was just looking to find what made me happy. So I played tennis. I worked with the Center for Attitudinal Healing. I worked with the Special Olympic kids. I did all kinds of stuff that was making me very happy. Played a lot of tennis
Hmm.
during those 6 months. I also was sitting at the same time with Jack Cornfield. He was a teacher on the West Coast. And his Monday night sittings were like anywhere between 20 and 40 people. Now he gets, I don't know, 300, 400 people. And we used to meet in a church. I rented a church to do that. And I loved meditating. I mean, there was all kinds of things that were going on with sitting. And then at some point, sitting with Jack, it was, he talked about suffering, and my life was never about suffering and hadn't been. And so it felt like that wasn't true for me. And so, went and sat with other teachers and did other things. And, I guess I just kept saying yes to whatever was offered. And luckily, a number of teachers came into my life, one of them being Byron Katie, and then Adyashanti, who were, I think were really pivotal in my life. So, with Byron Katie, everything is it true? So there was a knowing that whatever I was seeing and whatever I was thinking, I wanted to know more about it, so you can say, is it true? Just to see what was even deeper than that or beyond that. And I can say that for the longest time, so between when I got to California and when I started sitting with Adia and Katie, it was, let's see, that was 88 and 98, 10 years. It was 10 years. Yeah, so in that span of time, it was just, saying yes to a lot of different things. I said yes to a teacher that worked with mystical traditions, and she would say things and I would experience things, and I just knew I didn't know. So that was a lot of how I approached things. Is like she's telling me things and saying things, and wasn't my experience, but I just knew that I didn't know.
Gotcha.
Um,
So
yeah.
you had a very experimental spiritual life. It kind of sounds like you tried on a lot of different experiences to see what kind of answered those questions for you or guided you to the next phase in your life. And
Guided.
uh,
Mm-hmm.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Now you
Yeah.
mentioned.
And
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I also felt really uncomfortable saying that I was on a spiritual search. That just didn't work for me. That was like taboo. It's like, nope, I just want to know the truth. I'm not on a spiritual search.
Sure.
I just want to know what's true. Because I guess just because of all the baggage spirituality had at that point in time. I mean, everybody when I moved to California was recovering from something. So when I found that out, I thought, oh, I could be a recovering Catholic, because I didn't have a sex addiction, and I didn't have alcohol, and I didn't have all these other things. But I could say that I was a recovering Catholic, but just I never really felt like Catholicism, one way or the other, played a big role in growing up. So um, when I left home, I left Catholicism. I mean, that was it. There was nothing that I missed once I left that. It wasn't rich. It wasn't full. It wasn't. It was something that people told you about and said that there's mortal sin and you'll go to hell and all that stuff, and it just didn't ring true for me.
It didn't fill the
So
didn't fill the cup enough for what you were seeking in life.
at all, at any point in time.
So it sounds like you didn't have an addiction to thinking.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. Yeah.
So there was no inner struggle, because I know for me, and I think for Sean too, there was like, yes, we had some suffering and pain on the surface, but most of it, in hindsight now, I can see it was myself and my own thinking. You never had that.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, I never thought of that, but yeah, I would think that would be true.
And also too, what stands out to me is that, and I want you to think about this to see if because my language has sort of changed depending on what teacher I've been with, just because, or what the people I'm around, just because language is not really complete in explaining a lot of this stuff. And sometimes a teacher comes along, is like, oh yeah, I like that way of explaining it. That does sound better to me. So I've done that for sure with Adyashanti, because when I first got on the spiritual path, I wasn't seeking the truth. I didn't even know what that would even conceptually mean, right? That really I've learned from Adyashanti, and now for sure the truth is what it's all about for me. But when I first started, I just first of all wanted my ulcer to heal, and then I wanted to feel inner peace. And that still is like my big thing, is inner peace is the most important thing to me. Um, and also truth too, but inner peace is like number one for me. So is that true, that was your sort of language right from the get-go?
That was my language. Which one was my language?
Yeah, the truth, that you wanted to know the truth, because you said right from when your sister said, what makes you happy? And you didn't know, and you wanted to find truth, like right then back in the 80s, which you were how old then? 20 something?
No, 30s, I think.
Yeah.
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 30s. Yeah.
Yeah. And you already had that language of you wanted to know the truth. I mean, that's just really, really special, I think. There's a clarity.
Yeah.
There's a clarity in that.
And ease, certainly, too. I'm thinking of your internal struggle. I can't say that I had that. So yeah.
Yeah, and I can relate.
I think that.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. There's a delay in the Zoom, so I don't mean to keep cutting you off there.
No, it's okay. Go ahead, Sean.
Well, I think I can relate to that internal struggle. I grew up in a Christian home. Had that kind of background, but I also didn't have addiction like you mentioned. There wasn't an addiction to recover from. I did have addiction in my family. I can relate to that story of I'm suffering myself. I'm suffering my own drama. I'm suffering my own patterns that I can't let go of, and I think it is interesting to start your journey in that, I guess, in that regard, from, is this true? What is truth? That's actually a really profound question to even ask in the first place, but then to have that kind of the basis of your moving forward. How did that go for you? What did you find is true?
Well, at first I found everything to be true. Oh, yes, this made me happy. Oh, yes, that made me happy. And then I realized, again, just seeing that none of it really made me happy. And so then that put me back into myself again, of just, I'll say, listening, of just more listening to Yeah, listening for that resonance, listening for when somebody talks, does it resonate? And if it resonates, then there's something there. Um, I think just listening that way. I'm not really very talkative.
Oh, no, you're fine.
That's okay. We are.
We are.
We're
The only reason I'm not talking your ear off is because I don't want to keep cutting you off in the middle of this with the Zoom delay. But yeah, if you tell me, if you just say I don't want to talk anymore, I'll be happy to talk. But no, it's well, that kind of sums up, you know, when you get to that, when you get into that a meditation practice where you're searching for the internal intuition, the resonance, the guidance from source, from spirit, there isn't much to say. I mean, there really isn't a lot of dialogue. The longest process is shutting yourself up long enough to be able to actually hear that truth, and then of course bringing that into practice of real life. It sounds like once you realize that I this isn't making me happy, what's the next thing, or what's going to guide me towards that happiness, or what's going to guide me towards that truth. But you know that, and you said that was about a 10-year process of kind of creating that routine or that practice in your life.
Again, busyness came in, so it wasn't a full-on practice, or it wasn't a full-on search, um, like many spiritual seekers are able to do and have done. I was a nurse, so I was a nurse for 26 years. So, but I also knew that that wasn't it. Nursing wasn't it, and so that there was other ways of healing. So even very early on in the early 70s, when I was just a new nurse, I was using visualization with patients with pain before it was even big. Because I just knew that drugs either weren't working or there was another way without having to use drugs. And then became did biofeedback and did hypnotherapy and did a lot of different things. Went to took a course at Deaconess Hospital at the Mind Body Institute, and took their program, which was basically a four-prong approach, working with stress, with diseases throughout. So both sleep disorders and infertility and cancer and HIV and all of that. They just had a four-prong approach that helped with stress. And that was, meditation, the type of meditation. It was movement. It was right eating, but also questioning your thoughts. It was cognitive therapy back then. And so it was, it's just a path. And so each time you get something new and another tool in your toolbox, and you get to see deeper, you get to see more of where there's been a misunderstanding, or see what works and what doesn't work. It's really, for me, it was trial and error, or doing it or being it or whatever, that really, I'll say, was my process. Yeah. And then, I worked for Byron Katie and, lived, is it true? um, Day in and day out, I couldn't have a thought without that coming in.
Hmm.
So it was all a buildup, or letdown, or I don't know what it was, but it was just, it was my path. And, was having different experiences with that. And at the same time, I was with Adyashanti. So it was early on. He had only been teaching a year when I started to sit with him.
Mm-hmm.
So he was brand new to teaching, and at least openly teaching. He'd been doing that for years for his teacher. He'd been doing that. And yeah, so we've all come a long way. You know, uh, we wouldn't be who we are now if we didn't have the path that we took. So, yeah.
It's beautiful. So, I mean, it's so it's so unique, Patty, because I must say, I don't know. I mean, I guess Don was kind of like that, but even he, your beloved husband, had some, well, I wouldn't say struggle, because we were talking about how there was doesn't seem to be a struggle with either one of you really. Like you're just describing the next step each time, but there was no like driving struggle to get there. And that's very, I mean, I've been on the spiritual path a long time and talked to a lot of people, and I have, of course, my own personal experience. And it's very rare. I mean, people usually, it's some struggle that pushes them forward, and yours was, it just seems a lot more ease. How about, because I know you're like a karma yogi. You're, as far as yoga concerns, you're definitely service. You're a nurse. You have the well-being center. So you're a karma yogi. Your fulfillment comes from service. Can we agree on that?
Yes. Guilty as charged.
Well, I don't know if it's guilty. I think it's just our nature. I think it's
It is.
yeah, truly our nature. So, has there been a balance that's had to happen with that? Because I know typically, especially nurses, and they usually burn out. So, has there been a challenge for you with balance as far as that goes?
It has with doing the retreat center. I would say with work prior to, I would say no.
Not with nursing either. Not with nursing.
No.
Wow.
When I became a nurse, the reason I was a nurse or went into nursing was I knew I could always get a job, and I knew I could travel. So that was my motivation there. And yet I do love service. I mean, I loved working for Adya, and I loved working for Katie. And it was wonderful. It was amazing. It was, a real gift to do that.
Yeah.
Here, at the beginning of the Wellbeing Retreat Center, it was all new for me. Everything was new. I mean, everything was new. My learning curve was like straight up the whole time. And so it was like starting a business, which I didn't know what that meant until we did. And it's full on, it's full on. So, I would say I've had difficulty having boundaries with that. And
Now with nursing,
but I also feel like it's my life. So with Adya as well, it was my life. So it's not a matter of, you're doing too much here or doing too much there or whatever. It was my life. It was every ounce of me was doing what I was doing. So it didn't feel like an overwhelm. It didn't feel like I was doing too much. It didn't feel like any of that. Though I can say, because of that, at the end of that, I did have adrenal exhaustion, but it was my life, and I can't imagine having lived it any other way.
Yeah, because I feel like that, and I might be wrong, but it's for most people that get to that point, the typical story, I hate to put people in a box, but the typical story of somebody that, is more of a burnout and they become a workaholic, but you're not describing that. You're not describing, somebody that just put themselves into something because they don't have anything else in their life and that's their identity, because that's not you. So, so it's very, very, very interesting, the difference for you in just doing what's in front of you to do. As Sean and I have been talking about this podcast a lot, that's what the people we interview seem to have in common, is there's just something that takes us to the next step that we can't really describe. It's like a feeling. There's no other choice, and then you just do it. But there's no identity around it, is what I feel from you. Yeah. Sean, do you see that difference?
Yeah, I have like 8 different questions I want to ask you. I was thinking about which one to ask first. I think the biggest thing, uh, I know from talking to just, I don't have a huge relationship with a lot of different people in the medical field, but what I've heard and what I can imagine is, if you're dealing with a lot of physical trauma, um, you kind of get to see it from a bird's eye view perspective as a nurse, or even as a doctor. You're diagnosing it. You're trying to figure out what the problem is. But when you describe some of the other methods that you used, maybe experimental methods at the time, it sounds like you were looking for solutions of how to heal instead of problems necessarily, um, to dwell on. And did you ever take on empathetically any of the energy or people's trauma from being a nurse, or what was that experience like for you?
I think I was really lucky in that way. I did not.
Wow.
That's
That's crazy.
mind blowing to me.
I know, me too. Because Patty, if you know her, Patty's is a huge empath. I mean, she's can feel people, right? Sorry to interrupt, Patty, but I just wanted to, yeah.
I think that the difference, actually, I had talked to Colleen earlier today. I think the difference between being an empath and being with, I'll say, being with what is that it goes through me.
Mm.
It's like it doesn't. It's like there's no back. It doesn't stop. It just goes through. So I can be with that. I can be with them. I can be with the pain. I can be with, and it's not mine. It's not mine to hold on to. I can feel it. I can see it. But it's not mine. It's not mine.
Why
It moves through me.
why we laugh is because we have had this conversation. We have had a dysfunctional amount of empathy. Both Corinne and I have, and we've talked about it over the decade that we've known each other. And that's, I think we kind of, we parse that out, that there's being an empath, and then there's being a dysfunctional empath. A dysfunctional empath is what you're saying is when you hold on to something that isn't yours, and you allow somebody else's trauma or pain, or any experience really become yours. And that's what I think is fascinating. And I hope you didn't feel like we laughed at you just a minute ago. What we're laughing at how amazing that would be to have had that for ourselves years ago, as we've kind of stumbled through that realization, and to be honest, still stumble through that. And it's funny. What's also funny to me, and this was one of the other questions, was you mentioned at the beginning of your questioning, what is true, what makes me happy. You didn't want to call it a spiritual path. You didn't want to say that I'm now being a spiritual person, but it sounds like you kind of were to a large degree. You had a very healthy practice spiritually of being in the present moment, knowing what's yours, knowing what isn't, but then also being very present to the truth and what was right in front of you.
Yes.
I love it. This is a great interview for empaths, because I think 99.9% of empaths on the planet do not have the clarity that our dear Patty has. So it's beautiful to hear that, Patty, because I know nurses. I have friends that are nurses, and I certainly went through my adrenal exhaustion, 4 or 5 years ago, and didn't realize I was not allowing it to go through the back of me, obviously. But I love that. And I have certain things. Adyashanti actually went into it a couple years ago at a retreat that I was on with him. Somebody asked that question. He gave a couple of really great techniques, actually, for people. He had one where he said, you have the power of the sun in your solar plexus. And the sun, if anything gets close to it, will burn up. So if you go
Mm.
into a space, a party, or anything that you feel like, you know, there's going to be a lot of energy there that's difficult, he said, just turn up the dial, the sundial in your solar plexus. So I like that one. That one works for me really well. And then I also literally karate chop energy in front of me if the person's on the phone, or mostly I do it in my mind, so that they can't plug into my solar plexus, because I've been, especially when I was sick, I could literally feel when I was, still I was teaching yoga, like I was in bed for a month, and then I was teaching, but I couldn't really adjust people. I could just sit and teach. But then we'd serve bread and tea afterwards, and people would want to talk to me, and that was actually more difficult than teaching, was them, because they all sort of wanted something from me. They just didn't want to talk to me. They were looking for something from me. I didn't feel that way. That I could literally feel their tentacles trying to plug into my solar plexus. Like I was so sensitive at that point. And so now, yeah, I do this karate chop of energy that they can't, and they don't realize that they're doing it. It's not a conscious thing for most people. They're just, people are used to sort of plugging in their energetic source from others that have an abundance of it. And so we have to, kind of manage, at least for me personally, I've had to learn how to, just a few techniques that even I got from Adya. So Patty, you've never had to do any of that?
Not yet.
Wow.
So even with the wellness center, you have, this is fascinating to me to know, for you to say that. I believe you too. It's not even that you're just saying it. I actually believe that you have that, ability to let things pass through. And even with a wellness center where, obviously you're inviting people into your house, your space, your land, to, seek some of these questions that you have sought out as well. Do you experience people wanting to try to tap into that or take advantage of your energy, or mostly do you keep a healthy distance energetically, emotionally, spiritually? Or
I don't feel like I keep a distance, and I don't feel people are plugging into me.
Mm. That's awesome. I mean, and has that, even when you were going through that process where you were asking a lot of questions, everything was true. You mentioned earlier where everything, when you were looking for what's true, what makes me happy, everything was true, everything made me happy, and then you kind of had a secondary realization. Is Was that during the period that you were with Byron, or did you kind of have that secondary question and then you found Byron and Adya, and then you kind of went to that second phase after you found that experience of everything is true, all these things are making me happy, but then ultimately nothing's making me happy? What was the questioning then thereafter? What was the next process of internal dialogue of being in that other space with, with Byron or Adya?
Again, it was just me living it. I don't know that there was a question. I don't know that there was, um, maybe I can say it was more being it, for lack of a better word, because there weren't the questions anymore. I mean, on retreats, early on when Adya used to do retreats, um, there was an opportunity to do what's called Dokusan, which was a one-on-one question and answer with him. So you could sign up on a sheet and ask him questions. And I remember one time it was like, oh my gosh, I got to ask a question. I've got to come up with a question, because I don't ask questions. It doesn't seem, I don't have questions. And so it really, and for some reason I put my name on the board and I thought, oh shit, now I've got to come up with a question. And I didn't have any, all these, I didn't have, saying that I don't have questions, it makes me feel like I'm really dumb. I don't
No,
have questions.
no.
I mean, that's it's just like I just didn't have any. So I sat with it. So I just sat. I thought, oh my God. So I sat with a pen and paper, waiting to come up with the question. And then the thought came, what would ask a question?
Wow.
And it was the answer. It's like we all have our own answers, and so why would I go out there asking someone else the question, because the answer is already there looking, and so I went in and told him that. I said, I came in with I had to come up with a question, and I couldn't find one. And then the question came, what would ask the question? And I got the answer, which was the answer. And he said, "Is there anything else?" And I said, "No." Okay.
I love that. I mean, that is beautiful. I mean, that is the that is the beautiful simplicity of the vastness of the ether, of the spiritual, uh, I don't know, space, the void beyond our impermanent manifestation of reality, and I think for a really long time, as a seeker, maybe 5-10 years ago, I would have wanted more from that story. I would have been like, no, what was the profound thing that Adyashanti gave you as your guru, as your teacher? What was it? And what I think is so beautiful about the subtlety of that situation is the absolute beauty of the silence and the non-drama, that there is no question or anything that would ask the question. It would be a story anyways at that point, and you were trying to conjure a story thinking you needed to, when what you had was this kind of peaceful quietness, this peaceful silence, or at least a peaceful gravity to just be in whatever space you're in anyways. So that's amazing. That's a really beautiful little story.
Yeah, because I I would go to the Adyashanti retreats and think going into the retreat, oh, I'd love to ask a question. There's got to be, and I kind of would come to the same thing, but I would conjure up a question because I'd be sitting there and then something would cross my mind. I'd stick up my hand, and I got called up twice. And I was so petrified both times. Here I am, a singer. I've sung in front of 50,000 people before. I've sung in front of thousands of people many times. And I get in front, and there's a microphone, and I am so terrified that I can barely ask the question. And I certainly have no recognition or remembrance of the answer that he for both of my questions over 2 different retreats. No idea what his answer was. I had to buy the recording to figure out what he actually said. Buy the recording of the retreat because I was like so nervous. So, and I think both the questions were kind of ridiculous going back to, it's like, especially when you're on those retreats, it's like, there are questions for many people that come up, but usually what Adia says and what happens is if there is a question that comes up, it's usually answered either within, or he answers it in his talk or whatever. But I love that, Patty. I mean, all the answers we do have within. And, even when I work with my coaching clients, it's really me being able to mirror back to them what they already know. That's what I think being a good teacher is because no matter, even if you tell people, even people want to hear an answer, they won't get it when you give it to them anyway. They have to come up with it on their own. They have to realize that we have all had to have that on our own come up. That's when the juice, when the visceral understanding is anyway, when it comes to us. So you just got to it without a lot of story to it, which is a great example.
Yeah.
Well, there was another one, and I think it happened before that one. I can't remember the sequence, but there was another one, and you hear that people wake up from, you think of Byron Katie or Eckhart Tolle. Their life is suffering, and my life wasn't. My life was filled with joy. My life was amazing. Here I'm, traveling the world with Katie, traveling the world with Adya, and then I thought, oh my God, I'll never wake up, because my life isn't around suffering. And I thought, so how do I ask Adya that question? Knowing that I have my own answer. So, but what question would I ask? It's like, am I going to wake up? Or, do I have to suffer to wake up? Because none of those made any sense at all. And I just really sat on a silent retreat with that question of what would be the question? What could I ask that? What could I ask? Knowing that my life wasn't suffering and I remember going into my room, and because I'll say I was suffering about what question to ask. It was like, I really, 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 really want to know the truth. Will I wake up with not having suffered the way that I hear everybody else has to suffer? And I fell down on my knees, and the words came out, and take that too, and take that too. So for me, what that meant was take my life, take what it is currently, take this joy, take this amazing, wonderful life, take that too, if that's what it costs. And that was my answer. Just take this too.
Well, you surrender something, no matter what, I suppose. I mean, that the interesting thing I think that I struggle with in having profound amount of gratitude is when you have gratitude, when you have something, or you realize you have it good or great, or you haven't suffered nearly the amount, you do want to hold on to that. You want to attach yourself to, oh man, I'm so lucky, I'm so fortunate, I'm very thankful. I can't lose that, right? And what it sounds like you're saying is you had this moment of pure surrender of take everything, take all of that, take the life of not suffering as well as anybody else's life who has suffered. And obviously that's a very emotional experience. What was that like moving through that then afterwards, having that kind of experience of falling to your knees? What was that like living with that then?
I didn't have that question any longer, whether I'd wake up or not.
Yeah. That made Sean quiet. That's something.
Well, it feels like it deserves a moment of silence. I mean, what's interesting, and this is, Corinne and I've gotten to this experience a few different times, but one very profound time of, we have these questions, we have these answers, we have this, we have that, we have all these stories, and ultimately that it seems like the awakened experience is the experience where you don't ask that question anymore. It's not, I'm trying to articulate it, but does it matter if we wake up? Are we not awake? That's the real question, is, are we not already awakened? The experience of even observing the person asking the question, or the thing asking the question, or the being asking the question, isn't that the most profound thing, is having that awareness of this, of asking the questions in the first place? And sorry, I'm stumbling through it because it gets to a point where it just deserves a moment of silence and a moment of endearing surrender, I suppose.
So thank you for sharing that, Patty. That's very, very special. Feel very honored that you would share that.
And man, I think something needs to be said about this too. Last week when we spoke to Don, it speaking to him and then now speaking to you, it's somewhat intimidating because of the amount of space and silence and awareness that you have on your side of this Zoom call. There's a thoughtfulness, there's a presence, there's an awareness that holds a very deep gravity. And I feel like we all have that capacity to a certain degree, or maybe it just takes many lifetimes to get to that real presence and awareness of seeing the reflection of consciousness in another, and then also wearing the reflection of consciousness for other people as well. And I think that's, Corinne, you posted something recently about it's not about becoming more of something. It's more about stripping away all of the things or all the ways we are not something. And it's an interesting experience to go through enough of those maybe repetitions of stripping away all the ego, all the stories, all the questions, all the answers. Eventually, my question is, what do you get? What do you get when you get rid of everything? You know, the answer is, well, how could there be anything? And that's where I get stuck, and that's where my story devolves back into itself of, well, there has to be something, right? There has to be a story. There has to be some identifier. There has to be some identity in that. And it doesn't seem that is true, that there has to be something. And it's interesting how much you and Don wear that space, that consciousness of, well, we're just here. This is it. This is the moment. There's that deep gravity that you sit into. It's a bit terrifying, to be honest, for somebody who wants there to be a story.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you get to be you. You get to be you. That's what you get.
Yeah, and I feel the trauma that I feel with you saying that is, who am I then? Who am I to be?
Start there.
Yeah.
Start there. Start there.
And I imagine, because what I'm feeling very much in my chest, very much in my stomach, is this sense of fear about being a true self. You know, I think for a lot of people, there's this, I'm on a journey to find myself. But when you get to that point, this space, there's a fear. There is a,
What are you afraid you're going to find, Sean?
Exactly. I'm afraid I'm going to find what I'm looking
That's
for.
my question.
Oh, I think, yeah, I know.
Okay.
Well, I think I'm going to, I think there's a part of me that is yet to die. And I think there's probably a lot of people get to have this experience of, it's the death of the ego, of course. It's the death of identity. And I think that you get attached to the journey, right? You get attached to the quest, the searching. You get attached to that, to the point where you finally reach the, well, who am I then? Who do I get to be? What am I afraid of being? Maybe I'm afraid to be not. Maybe I'm afraid to not be anything, or maybe I'm afraid to devolve back into the, beautiful void of God, or I don't know. You could just feel the fear, right? There's nothing tangible to attach that to anymore. It's just a sense of fear, I guess.
How's that working for you?
Fuck, not great. Exactly, man. I mean, exactly. And that's it, right? I mean, if it doesn't work, if it's not real, if it isn't true, let it go. How? Why?
Well, just see it.
Yeah.
If you really see through that, if you really see that it isn't true, if you really see, it lets go of itself.
Mm.
You don't have to do anything. You're still holding on. You still want something. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's I think that's the kind of new battleground. I think the new battleground is this this man. It's like those. Do you remember those like pulley toys where when you pulled it, it like spiraled, and you kept on pulling it, and you pulled it back and forth, and it's like this stretch and this constant come back to center. And we've been talking a lot about the stickiness of the ego, and the stickiness of identity, and the stickiness, and getting to a place where things don't hold on for quite as long when you have a solid meditation practice where you are taking this in, but there's this constant like push and stretch and pull and of these questions, and this like, I know this is true, I know this isn't true, let go, back to and it's just this spiral. It's a spiraling down kind of a feeling, and it's this real chaos, and it's just like, when does that let go? And that's a question for me, is when does that let go? When does it finally just say enough's enough? And when do I say enough's enough? And I don't know. I don't know. I'm terrified right now because it gets scary, because you don't know how to identify or attach to something that you can't identify or attach to, and that is ultimate consciousness. There's nothing to attach to. There's just surrender. There is just full surrender to that. There's no more to do after that point, I imagine.
That's a lot of words.
Does that remind you of anybody, Sean?
Yeah.
I'm constantly going to Sean. It's so much. It's just it's so, you're so much. Because he'll take a moment of truth, of just stillness, and then he'll just dissect it like crazy.
Yeah. It's utter chaos over here, ladies.
Awesome.
It's disastrous, and
that's why we love him.
Oh, well, it's fun. I mean, it is fun at this point. I've learned to laugh a lot about it, and have the comedy of it. Watching my own chaos unfold over and over again is quite entertaining, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah.
We'll bring him to the Wellbeing Retreat Center.
It's funny. It's funny how quickly it can devolve into this experience, and I think that's what's fascinating is, earlier when we kind of laughed at your experience of, no, I don't take on anybody else's shit. I'm like, oh my God, that's been my story, is I can't wait to, and I appreciate and I value so much, the diversity of these conversations that we've had with people, and the different backgrounds that, that everybody in these interviews have had, because, it kind of rounds out the diversity of the experiences we can have, and how crazy we can get, and how many little potholes, or how many, let's minefields that we have to walk through of our own design, really. And if you walk through life just letting all that go, that's what you get. You don't get the stickiness. You don't get the attachment. You don't get all that stuff. But it takes, I don't know. Some people obviously doesn't take. Would you say you've had to do work in your spiritual practice to maintain that, or once you had that moment of surrender, there's nothing to maintain?
Whenever there's, I'll say, dis-ease that comes up, I know that I'm believing something that's not true. So I can either choose to go in or suffer. My choice.
And even that meditation that you described, where you became the trees and the birds, was meditation always like that for you after that?
For a lot of years, one, I never talked about it, so I didn't know it was different. So it was probably 7 years later that I told somebody, and they told me that that's not the usual meditation. Um, and so that was a surprise. Um, I'd say that, and then when I was in nursing, I was meditating, in the mornings before I would go to work. On again, off again. With Adia, I would be on every retreat, and so my favorite times here are our retreats because I sit. Otherwise, I don't do a lot of sitting. And it's not the same right now as it was back then. There was a lot of different things that were happening when I first started meditating that I haven't experienced again. I don't know that I need to. I'm not looking to. So, yeah, I sit and then see what happens. Sometimes it's quiet and sometimes it's not. And when there's a bunch of people, when there's more than one person, obviously, it's much richer for me. Uh, so I enjoy that. And I could sit for hours, hours, and did, when I could. It's not part of my life right now as much as it has been in the past. So, yeah.
It's beautiful. Beautiful, Patty. Well, I think we've talked your ear enough off, because I mean, it's such a grace for you to be with us. It really is, for you to share your heart and your essence. I just feel like we've been touched by an angel today.
Well, it's really interesting hearing, what you guys see reflected back to me, because there isn't that here. And so just even the things that you've said, it's made me really curious.
Well,
Really?
if you are in fact curious, we always do a say more section after each interview, and we will be talking about you for probably longer than normal because of how that hit, and all great things. I think that's what that I appreciate very much and very deeply what I'm feeling, which is utter confusion that there isn't more story. That's something that I'm letting go of, is these stories and the drama and all that stuff. And it's a great practice, and it's a great reflection to see. And I appreciate that you didn't buy into my bullshit, and that you very, very appropriately, called it for what it was. That's a lot of words. And again, I really thank you. It's kind of these moments of being stunned and struck by these gravities, and that's, you and Don have both been that for us and for me particularly. So thank you very much for that.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
All right, Patty, thank you. So much love.
Thank you.
Yeah, so much love for you both. Yeah.